I never thought I'd end up on an oil rig. Not after everything I went through back home. But desperation's a strange thing. It doesn't always shove you off a cliff. Sometimes it hands you a clipboard, points to a helicopter, and tells you this is your last shot. The rig was called the Euryale. She sat in the middle of the North Atlantic like she didn't belong to the world anymore. Just metal and rust and shadows swallowed by fog that never lifted. When the chopper descended, all I could see were cranes and platforms cutting through the clouds like broken ribs. And water. Endless black water that never stopped moving. The moment my boots hit the landing pad, the cold punched me in the chest. Not just the kind that makes your fingers go numb, but a deeper cold. One that settled in the lungs. The kind that came with silence. No one spoke. The crew stood back, watching the rotor blades wind down, but their eyes didn't meet mine. No handshakes, no greetings, just turned shoulders and slumped jackets. I started wondering if I was even supposed to be there. Then he appeared, broad-shouldered, maybe 50, with deep gray eyes and a face carved from weather and work. His jumpsuit was stained with grease, sleeves rolled high. From his belt hung a steel loop that clinked with every step. "You the welder?" "Yeah," I said. "Name's Mara." "Call me Roan. And take this." He held out a small brass tag, strung on a thick black cord. My name was already etched into it, Mara, clean and sharp. It was heavier than I expected, cold, like it had just come from ice water. "Don't lose it," he said. "Don't take it off. Shower with it, sleep with it, keep it on, even if you're dying." Something about the way he said it, calm, direct, like a fact rather than a warning, made me just nod and loop it over my head. "Good," he said, turning. "This way." The Euryale wasn't built for comfort. Roan led me down a narrow steel corridor lined with pipes that groaned and hissed overhead. The floor grates clanked under our boots. Rust clung to every edge like dried blood. Salt air filled my lungs, metallic and bitter. As we walked, Roan pointed things out with barely a glance. Compressors, welding bays, fuel lines. "Safety ladders are painted yellow. Don't use any that aren't. That one's broken. That one's always frozen." Nothing about the place felt safe. The whole rig creaked like it was trying to come apart. "First rule's the tag," Roan said over his shoulder. "You've got that. Don't ever take it off." I nodded again, trying to keep pace. The crew quarters were cramped. Bunks stacked too high, barely enough space to walk between them. I dropped my duffel on the lower one. My roommate was on night shift, apparently. The other bed was rumpled, sheets still warm. At the end of the hallway, just before Roan turned to leave, I noticed a doorway covered in thick tarp nailed into the frame. It fluttered slightly, even though the hallway air was still. I paused, staring. The shadows behind it didn't sit right. Roan saw me looking. "You'll get the rest of the rules tomorrow," he said. "Just remember that first one tonight." I was too tired to argue. The flight, the cold, the weight of everything I'd left behind pressing on my chest. Later that night, after unpacking and dragging myself to the shower, I peeled off the name tag and set it on the small bench beside the stall. The cord was wet with sweat. I figured I'd put it back on after I was clean. The water was lukewarm at best, but it helped. I let it run down my neck, tried to loosen the knot in my shoulders. I started thinking about home, about the bills stacked on the kitchen counter, about the job I walked away from, about the man I thought I'd never escape. Then the water stopped, all at once. The pipes groaned, then fell completely silent. I blinked, confused, listening. I heard footsteps, moving slowly outside the bathroom. I thought maybe it was my roommate. I called out, nothing. I stepped out, wrapping a towel around myself. The mirror was fogged, but the air felt wrong, heavier than it should have been. I looked down. My name tag was gone. Panic hit fast and sharp. I spun around. The bathroom door was slightly open. I knew I'd shut it. My heart kicked hard against my ribs as I stepped out into the hallway. It was empty. Lights flickered. The air was damp. I ran back to the bunk room, heart pounding, skin freezing. The tag was there, lying on the floor beside my duffel. But something was off. The walls near my bed were wet. Not just condensation. There were handprints. Long, narrow fingers smudged into the metal, slick and dripping with salt. I snatched up the name tag and looped it over my head with shaking hands. Didn't sleep that night, not really, and I never took it off again. Not once. Not even to shower. The next morning, Roan was waiting for me outside the galley like nothing strange had happened the night before. He nodded at the name tag hanging around my neck, then handed me a mug of black coffee so bitter it tasted like battery acid. "Hold up," he said as I reached for the sugar. "We walk and talk. You'll eat later." I didn't argue. The way things worked out here, you learned fast not to question the flow. There was a rhythm to the Euryale, even if it felt completely wrong. Roan had it memorized. I was just trying to keep up. He led me past the drill deck, out through a rattling door that stuck in the frame, then down a frost-covered corridor. The walls here were darker, tight enough that our shoulders brushed the sides. Somewhere deep below, something thudded in a slow, steady rhythm. Machinery, maybe. Or something pretending to be. Roan pointed as we walked. "See that hatch?" he said, nodding toward a small steel door painted blue at the very end of the corridor. It sat flush with the floor, round and unmarked, except for a faint ring of darker rust circling its edge like something had spilled from beneath. "Yeah," I said. He stopped walking and turned to face me. "Rule 2, he said quietly. "You do not touch that hatch, not for any reason. I don't care if you hear a voice. I don't care if someone screams for help. You walk past it, eyes forward, keep going." I glanced at the hatch again. The light above it flickered, casting weird, watery shadows across the floor. "What's behind it?" I asked. Roan's jaw tensed, but he didn't answer, just turned and kept walking. I followed. The rest of the day passed in hard, freezing work. Welding along pipe joints that hissed when heated, cutting into corroded panels with a torch that barely stayed lit in the wind. I kept my focus on the metal, on the flame, on the smell of burned insulation. I didn't think about the hatch again. Until night fell. I was headed back to quarters alone, soaked with salt and sweat, when I found myself in Corridor B again. My boots echoed on the metal floor as I turned the corner. I realized too late where I was. The blue hatch sat there, waiting. I slowed, then told myself not to. Roan had been clear. Walk past, eyes forward, no matter what. But then I heard it, a voice, familiar. "Mara." I froze. It wasn't just a voice, it was my mother's voice. Gentle, weak, like she was lying in bed, sick, like when I was 16 and she couldn't stop coughing. I hadn't heard that sound in years, not since the funeral. "Mara, baby, please." I took a step forward before I realized what I was doing. The air around the hatch had changed. It felt damp, warmer than the corridor. There was a faint blue glow coming from beneath the edges of the door, flickering like candlelight underwater. My hand hovered near the latch. Then something shifted, just a flicker, but it made every instinct in my body lock up. The voice kept calling, closer now. "Please help me, I'm cold." It wasn't right. I backed up, just one step. The voice sharpened, less pleading now, more hungry. "Let me out, Mara." I didn't answer. I didn't run, either. Just moved backward slowly, keeping my eyes locked on the wall beside the hatch, never letting myself look directly at the glow. Then something scraped against the inside of the hatch. Metal on metal. I turned and walked fast, almost ran. Didn't stop until I was back in the bunk room, door latched, tag still tight around my neck. My hands were shaking too hard to untie my boots, so I just sat on the bed until the trembling slowed. The next morning, Roan passed me in the galley without saying a word. But he gave me a look, a long one. Not angry, just making sure I was still there, still following the rules. I was and I would be, because whatever was behind that hatch wasn't my mother. By the end of my 3rd day, I was starting to understand the pattern of things. Weld, patch, eat, sleep, repeat. The wind never stopped, the fog never moved, and the rig always creaked like it was remembering something it didn't want to. Roan didn't talk much unless he had to, but when he did, it mattered. He caught me on the walkway outside the mess hall just after sundown. The sky was a washed-out gray, and the ocean looked like oil. "You remember what day it is tomorrow?" I blinked. "Thursday?" He shook his head once. "Wednesday, right?" I had lost track already. "Cover every mirror," he said. "Anything reflective, really, but mirrors especially. Doesn't have to be fancy. Tarp, towel, coat, whatever works." I waited for the explanation, but none came. Just that flat stare of his, same as when he'd warned me about the hatch. "Cover them until when?" I asked. "Sunrise. And don't look. Not even a glance. If you see your reflection move wrong, get out. Close the door behind you. Don't go back in." That was it. He walked off, coffee in hand like it was just another safety regulation. I made a mental note and forced myself to laugh a little about it. But I didn't forget. The next morning came fast. The alarm in my bunk buzzed at 6, and I rolled out groggy, aching from head to toe. I sat up, rubbed my eyes, and stared at the steel wall across from me. I had left my small mirror hanging on the bunk post. Just a cheap handheld one, something I brought from home to keep a sense of normal. And I'd forgotten to cover it. I blinked at it through a haze of half-sleep. At first, everything looked fine. The same tired face, the same dull eyes, the same dark circles. But then, just for a second, I saw it. The reflection blinked too slow. And it smiled. I froze. The air around me went heavy. My breath caught in my throat like I'd been sucker-punched. That thing in the mirror, it tilted its head to the side, slowly, like it was studying me. I watched my own face shift into something unfamiliar. Still me, but not. My fingers trembled as I reached for the towel on the end of my bed. I didn't look away. I didn't dare. I moved one step closer, heart hammering, then tossed the towel over the mirror in one motion. The second the reflection vanished, the pressure in the room lifted. Not all the way, but enough for me to breathe. I stood there a long time, just listening. There was no sound, not even the usual creaks. Finally, I backed out of the room. I didn't touch anything else, didn't even grab my boots. Just walked barefoot down the hall to the common showers and stood under cold water until I couldn't feel my hands. I didn't say anything to Roan. But he knew. He looked at me across the welding station that afternoon and gave the smallest nod I'd ever seen, like you did what you had to do. That night, I made a list of every reflective surface I could think of. The mirror, the locker doors, the chrome handle on the bathroom sink. I covered all of them with old shirts, paper, whatever I had. I didn't sleep well, but I didn't wake up screaming either. In the morning, I checked the towel over the mirror before I touched it. It was soaked, like someone or something had been breathing against it all night. The fourth rule felt almost too simple when Roan first told me. After dark, he said one night while we were cleaning a jammed weld head, don't look into the water. Not the ocean. Not puddles, not even the little drips that pool under the valves. If something looks back, don't engage, don't look twice. I raised an eyebrow, trying not to laugh. You're serious? Roan just nodded and tightened the last bolt. If the ocean ever really looked back at us, we wouldn't come back up. It wasn't hard to follow at first. The rig was busy during the day, the deck too bright and chaotic for reflections to stand out. But once night settled in, the place turned quiet. Still, like the whole thing was holding its breath. I was on solo rotation that evening, assigned to check over some pressure lines out near the east maintenance rails. The wind was sharp, constant, scraping across the deck loud enough to drown out my own footsteps. I kept my head down, moved fast, tried to pretend I didn't feel the floor humming under my boots. The pipe joint I was assigned to was halfway corroded. I crouched beside it, torch in one hand, stabilizer clamp in the other, when I noticed it. A small puddle, right at the edge of the rail, probably from a broken sprayer line or runoff from a previous rain. It had pooled perfectly, smooth as glass, reflecting the low floodlight above me like it was trying to catch my attention. I glanced at it, just once, just long enough to see something move. I blinked and leaned closer. There was an eye, not mine, not human. Just a pale, unblinking eye staring up from the black surface. I froze. My torch hissed out in the wind. The puddle didn't ripple. It didn't shift. It just watched. Then another eye appeared, and another. There were 3, clustered together in the dark, just under the surface, unmoving. I stumbled back. My heel clipped the edge of the platform railing. My whole body swayed. I almost went over. The only thing that stopped me was the emergency line clipped to my belt. It snapped tight and jerked me sideways before I could tip into the sea. The puddle was gone. I looked again. Nothing but wet metal. But the platform floor was soaked now. Not just near the joint. Everywhere. As if something had dragged itself through, leaving a smear of salt and slime in long, deliberate trails. I didn't finish the weld. I backed away, climbed the access ladder, and radioed Roan. When he found me 10 minutes later, I was still holding my torch with both hands like a weapon. He didn't yell, didn't ask what happened, just glanced at the empty deck, sniffed once like he could smell it, and said, "Don't linger when it finds you." "What found me?" I asked, but he just walked away. That night, I laid in my bunk staring at the ceiling, trying not to think about the eyes. The way they just waited, no blinking, no motion. Like they had all the time in the world. By the 5th day, the rig started feeling smaller. Not physically. There were still miles of ladders, decks, and corridors I hadn't explored, but something about the air had changed. It pressed in. Every hallway echoed longer. Every bolt felt looser. Every face seemed older. We were working on the lower deck that morning, near the substructure. Roan had barely spoken all shift until he handed me a fresh tank and nodded toward the scaffold near the western struts. "You're with me today. Deep pump's acting up again." I paused. "That's near the wellhead, right?" "Bottom level," he said. "Don't say a word once we're close." Rule 5. Right. I remembered. When near the deep pump, do not speak. Hand signals only. Roan had told me that back on day 1, but this was the first time I'd been assigned near it. I clipped my harness, checked my mask, and followed him down the ladder. The temperature dropped as we descended. Each level got darker, quieter. The metal here was older, twisted by decades of pressure and salt, and below all of it, the pulse. It wasn't mechanical. I'd heard engines. I'd stood next to turbines screaming loud enough to shake bone. But this sound, it was deep, slow, like a breath drawn from something that didn't need air. The pump chamber was long, narrow, and filled with mist. Condensation dripped steadily from the overhead lines, puddling around our boots. The floor groaned under us. Roan pointed to a valve joint, motioning for me to check the pressure gauge while he worked on the adjacent housing. I nodded and moved into position. The moment I kneeled down, I saw it. A dark stain just behind the pump casing. Not oil, not rust. It shimmered, thin and black and moving without spreading, like it had its own shape. My stomach turned, but I looked away and focused on the dial. Roan raised 2 fingers, then pointed to the wrench. I handed it over. A minute passed, then 2. Then, I spoke. Not loud, just a reflex. "Clamps loose," I muttered under my breath, more to myself than him. Roan's head snapped toward me. Too late. The chamber groaned. No, not groaned. Responded. The pump housing pulsed hard enough to rattle the bolts. The pressure gauge needle dropped, then twitched violently side to side. Somewhere behind the wall, I heard something shift, wet and slow, like flesh dragging over steel. The air changed. It was heavier, almost thick, like breathing through cloth, and underneath it all came a new sound. Whispers. A chorus of voices, too far away to make out, but close enough to feel in my teeth. They didn't sound angry. They didn't sound human. Roan reached me in 2 steps, grabbed my arm, and yanked me back hard. We climbed the scaffold fast, not speaking, not looking back. Once we cleared the upper deck, he slammed the access hatch behind us and turned. "You said something," he hissed. "I didn't mean to." "Doesn't matter," he said, his voice low. "It heard you. Don't give it anything else." We didn't go back down that day. And when I passed the maintenance logs that evening, I noticed something strange. Every entry for the deep pump section had the last 10 feet crossed out. Like someone had tried to erase the very idea of it. That night, I dreamed of voices. They weren't speaking to me exactly, they were repeating me. Every word I'd ever said, backward. By the end of the 2nd week, the rules had sunk into my bones. I wore the name tag like a second skin. I didn't look at puddles, didn't speak near the pump, and hadn't glanced at a mirror since the Wednesday incident. Every sound, every flicker of movement, every gust of cold air felt personal, like the rig was watching, testing, waiting. Roan had said there were 6 rules, but I always knew there'd be more. The final day started quiet. Too quiet. No seagulls. No wind. Just the heavy groan of the Euryale shifting in place and the distant churn of waves that didn't sound quite right anymore. I was packing my gear after dinner, already picturing the helicopter that would take me back to land in the morning, when Roan appeared in the doorway. He didn't speak at first, just leaned against the frame with a metal flask in one hand and 2 tin cups in the other. "You earned it," he said, pouring 2 fingers of whiskey into each cup. I took mine and sat. "Tomorrow," he said, "you fly home, but there's one more thing you need to see." I waited. He didn't meet my eyes. "Rule 6, he said. "If the music plays, drop everything and get to the muster room. Do not speak. Do not open the door, no matter what you hear." I opened my mouth to ask something, but that was when the speakers clicked on. Just a soft pop, like someone flicking an old cassette deck, and then the music started. Old swing jazz. Grainy, slowed down, and off-key like it was being played underwater. The same 3 bars over and over, brass that crackled, drums that thudded too slow. Roan's cup hit the floor before I even stood up. He grabbed my arm hard. Move. We ran, past the dining hall, down 2 ladders, into the long red corridor behind the galley. The sound followed us, echoing down the pipes. I could hear others now, footsteps above us, boots hitting metal stairs fast, shouts that cut off mid-word. We slammed into the muster room, heavy steel door. Roan shoved it closed and spun the lock. Inside were 6 others. No one talked. No one even looked at each other. The music grew louder, then stopped all at once. A woman sobbed just outside the door. Then she called my name. But it wasn't my voice. It was close. The pitch, the rhythm. But wrong in a way I felt more than heard. "Mara, open the door." Something thumped against the steel. "Mara, please." We didn't move. The carvings on the wall, symbols I hadn't noticed before, seemed to shimmer. Spirals, eyes, something that might have been tentacles, all drawn in jagged lines like someone had etched them with shaking hands. Then silence. We stayed there for an hour. Roan watched the second hand on his wristwatch the whole time. When he finally opened the door, the hallway was empty. But the floor outside was wet with thick, dark footprints, bare, like someone had walked through oil. The next morning, the sea was calm. Too calm. Not a ripple in sight. The air was still, the fog lifted. I could see the sky for the first time since I arrived. We had pancakes for breakfast. The syrup was watery and tasted like metal, but no one complained. Then Roan clinked his mug and stood. "Time for the lottery," he said. The room fell dead quiet. A black barrel was brought to the center of the galley, round, dented, and cold. One by one, each crew member stepped forward and dropped in their brass name tags, some with shaking hands, some without blinking. No one spoke. I didn't want to let go of mine. My fingers clutched it like it was the last thing keeping me real. But Roan gave me a look, not a threat, just understanding. I let it fall. The clang echoed inside the barrel. Virgil, one of the older deckhands, stepped up and reached in. His hand came out slowly, fist closed. He uncurled his fingers. "Elias." The man across from me, quiet, younger, usually stuck near the pipes, collapsed. He didn't run. 2 crew members lifted him by the arms and carried him toward the storage hatch. No one spoke. Another ladle was dipped into a drum of thick black oil. I don't know where it came from. I hadn't seen it before. They poured it over Elias's head. He screamed, and still no one looked away. They painted symbols on the railings, on the support beams, on the deck beneath our feet. Circles, eyes, long chains of human figures holding hands. The same shapes I'd seen in the muster room. When it was done, the wind picked up. The fog returned, and the rig groaned. Not in pain this time, but relief. Roan handed my name tag back without a word, just a nod. "See you next cycle," he said. I didn't answer. I just boarded the chopper, watched the Euryale shrink into the fog behind us, and I knew I'd be back, not because I wanted to, because something had my name now, and it would never let go. Rule 7. There must always be a sacrifice.